Good day and welcome to the solution video for Practical 4. As you can see, I've already got all my forms created. I'm going to do this video slightly differently than usual. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fast forward through the code, and then explain the sections that I believe are a bit more difficult or need explaining. So as you can see here, I've already created all my forms and some code which basically links this main menu form to the other two forms. I'm going to continue explaining this initial part because this is the complicated part, the new section, which is to create new classes. So to create a class, you go project, add class, you go ahead and name it whatever you want. In this case, the first class we got to name is shapes. You then go ahead and say add, and as you can see, it creates our class over here in which we can edit and create our various parameters that we need. So I'm going to go ahead and create the next class as well at the same time, called houses. Okay, so inside here we can create our various parameters that we need. I'm going to go ahead and just take a look what it is that we need for shapes. Okay, and okay, it doesn't tell you specifically, but because we're working with squares and rectangles, we know we're going to need an int height, which we need to name m height, and an m width. Okay, for this we need to create what they call our getters and setters, which is our properties. To do this, we can either type it all out, or we can just quickly right click, quick refactorings, and which one is it? Oh, yeah, this one looks good. Width, height. Cool. And it's created all our getters and setters for us. We can just go ahead and remove these m's just so it's a bit easier to identify them from the other forms. Okay, so we've created our getters and setters, which just returns m height and sets m height to value and returns width and so on. Next, minimize that. Okay, next we need to create a constructor. To create a constructor, we just go public shapes. My brackets are going all funny here. Okay, inside a constructor we can either have a constructor that takes arguments or doesn't take arguments. If we don't take arguments, we just leave this bracket empty, and we set m height to be equal to 0 because it doesn't get a value, and m width to be equal to 0 because it doesn't get a value. We can overload this constructor, which means to create a same constructor same named constructor, so it's also called shapes, but the secondary one takes arguments. So this one will take int height, let's say. Then we can set m height to be equal to this height that gets passed through. So what this does, as a quick example, when we go ahead and create our object, so we create it by, what did I call it? Shapes. Shapes underscore s is equal to new shapes, right? What this means is when we construct it, we can either pass through parameters or not. Let me go ahead and did it too fast. Okay, here we go. As you can see, it takes either one with no argument or one with an int height, and if I go ahead and add a third, or the next two parameters quickly, or constructor, sorry, I can do one with int width, which sets m width to be equal to that, and then okay, so you can't do this one. I'll explain why. M width to be equal to 0, because you cannot have a constructor that has the same amounts of arguments and same types of arguments. So you cannot have a constructor that has just one argument that is of int type. So we're just going to leave it as height, and then the last one we're going to do both int height, where we set height to be equal to height. Okay, so now if we go back to here, we'll see we'll have 3 parameters, one of 3. So one that takes nothing, one that just takes a height, and one that takes a height and a width. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and make this class global, shapes underscore s, and under this create button I'm going to actually instantiate that class into an object. Okay, so now it's a new object of type shapes. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and fast forward the video now. Oh, sorry, there's one more thing we need to do in this class, which if we take a look here, it says we need to check if it's a square. We must use a method from the class that checks if it's a square or not. So over here we can go ahead and create our public bool, let's say, is square. And inside here we can check if, what is it, m width is equal to m height, return true. Else, well no, we don't need an else, we can just say return false. Okay, so all we're doing in this method is we're returning true or false. So we're checking, is it a square? If the width is equal to the height, it is a square, so we're returning true. Okay, so that's our class pretty much sorted. So we've created our class for a shape, which is a square or a rectangle. Now we need to access that class accordingly. So from this form over here, nope, this one here, we're going to create our object. In the first one, that means we just simply say s is equal to a new version of shape. In this case, we're not going to pass through parameters when we create it. Instead, we'll do that under set object values. So here what we can do is we can say s.height is equal to, and then we can say nud, well, we're going to need to convert .toInt nud height dot value underscore s dot width is equal to convert .toInt open brackets nud width dot value. Oh yeah, we need to do a little bit of error handling here, because as you can see, if I go ahead and test this, if I just instantly click that, it's gonna crash. That's because we haven't yet created the object, so we need to get the user to first create the object and then try and set values to it. So to do that, we just put a try catch around it and say over here message box dot show please create object before setting values. Okay, next we can go ahead and say read object values, which will be super similar. In this case, it may not be visible, but there's a panel over here in which we want to read the height and width values from this s object into that panel. So it's called PNL output dot height must be equal to our s object dot height. Okay, so what that's going to basically do is use our getter, which is inside here, our getter, and it's going to return the m height value. This previous one over here, when it says s height is equal to, that uses our setter and sets m height to be equal to whatever value. Okay. So we're going to set panel height to be equal to s.height and panel dot width to be equal to underscore s dot width. Okay, again we need to have a try catch around all of this. Nope. Try and catch around all of that. Okay, but this time it's please create an object before reading values. Okay, let's go ahead and test this quick. Part 1, create an object. Let's go ahead and make it 10 by 15, set object, read object, and it creates a 10 pixels by 15 pixels. Okay, lastly, we need to go ahead and check, is it a square? So all we can do there is check if underscore s dot is square, then say message box dot show yes. We can just go ahead and remove that, make it a bit neater. Else we'll say message box dot show no. Okay, so what this is doing is we're reading the s object and we're checking, is it a square? That goes into our class shapes, goes to our method is square, it checks if it's a square. If it is, it returns true. So it returns true to here and says yes, it is a square. Let's go ahead and test it quick. Part 1, create object, we'll make it 10 by 50, set read, is it? No, it's not. We'll make it 50 by 50, set read, Is it square? Yes, it is. Okay, so that looks like it works. So that's just a quick intro into classes and objects. As you can see here, we got our class with our various parameters, methods that we use to adapt those parameters, our getters and setters, our constructors, and so on. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward the video now while I quickly create the house class according to what the briefing states. It tells us here everything we need to know. Once I've created it, I'll come back and explain it all. Okay. Okay, so I've created my house my house class, sorry, which we have a price, double type, int type for beds and bathrooms, string for our address. We've got our various getters and setters for each of those. We have two constructors, sorry, one that takes no arguments and one that takes all the arguments, and then lastly we've got a calculate installment method in which we just create a double installment, set it to be equal to 0. We say installment is equal to our price times by 0.1, which is basically 10% of price, and then we divide it by 12, which returns our per month value. Okay, and then we return that installment. So it says here one additional bonus challenge thing. To create the parameter of a house called wall color that will take type color, you will need to add the namespace to do that. So as you can see here, as it said there, we need to add a namespace. So we're going to say using system.drawing. That allows us to create a color type. Wall colors, let's say. We can then go ahead and just create our getter and setter for that, wall color. There we go. And lastly, we can just add it to our constructor over here, wall color. Okay, and then last one over here is wall color needs to equal to wall color. Cool. So again, this is my class that I quickly created. We've got all our data types that we need for this specific class. We've got all our getters and setters, so we can edit those data types. And we've got our constructors, 2 types in this case. And lastly, we've got our method that calculates installment, which is what we need for our house class. So next what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just click the add button and create the click event handler for that. And what we're going to do here is we're going to create an object, set all of these values to that object, and then read those values into here. Okay, so that all happens in one click. It's no longer like Shapes was, where we do it under one click event handler. Now we're just going to do it under separate. Sorry, now we're just going to go ahead and do it under one. So I'm just going to go ahead and code that and fast forward the video at this stage. Okay, so I think I've added everything that I need to in terms of code. As we can take a look here, first things first is note that I put a try catch around everything. You'll see my catch has a general exception queue. That's because I don't know what errors may occur over here, but I don't want to let it crash, so instead I just make it a general exception and tell the user, this error occurred. If I manage to crash it now while testing, I can make more detailed exception error messages. Okay, so what I do here, create a house object. I don't pass through any parameters for the constructor. What we could do is we could cut this down a couple lines and put these inside of the constructor method, which will obviously trigger this constructor over here instead of the blank one. It doesn't really make much difference, but of course I'm gonna go ahead and just show you just to see how that works. So we pass through, what is the order? It goes beds, baths, address, beds, comma, baths, comma, address, comma, price and color, comma, price, comma, color. Okay, so now what I'm doing is, as I create the object, I use this constructor and pass through all the values, which basically does the exact same as setting them individually. So now I can set baths, beds, and so on the moment I create the object. This is essentially the same as doing this over here. It just adds a few steps, as here you gotta individually set each value to be through the getters and setter. Obviously this way is a bit quicker, it reduces the amount of code, so I'm gonna keep this way. Okay, so I've used my constructor to set all the values of the house into my H object. I then go ahead and read all of those values out of the H object and store them inside the data grid view at the specific column. Over here, the last one, I use the calc installment method from my H object to figure out what the installment is for this house, and then set that using the method inside of my class. Finally, I go ahead and set the back color of all of these cells to whatever it is color that the house has been set. And one last thing I did was just added a bunch of colors to this combo box collection. Okay, let's go ahead and test if it works quickly. Price will say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Cool, address will be 12 green. I don't know. Bedrooms 3, 2, color can be green because it's green. And add. Okay, so we've got an error over here. The following error occurred. The index was out of range and must be non-neg. Okay, so what my issue is the forgetting to add a row to my DGB. I'm trying to add it to the -2th row, which doesn't obviously exist. So the first thing I have to go ahead and do is DGB houses dot rows dot add. This should fix it. Let's go ahead and take a look. Prices, address can be 13 pink, let's say this time. Make the color pink, obviously. 3 to add, and there we go. It's added it. It added the address, the price, the bathrooms, bedrooms, and then it calculated the installment. Okay, one thing I see here is this installment is got a lot of decimal places there, so we need to go ahead and fix that. We can do that in our method itself, so let's go to the class, open over here. What we can just do here is say math dot round, open brackets, comma, 2 decimal places. And there we go. One more quick test. Let's make it 2, 5, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 14 gray. I don't have grey, so we'll just make it cyan. Let's say 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and there we go. Sorted. So it looks like everything's working as it should be. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's just go ahead and make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, okay, this looks good otherwise. Let's go ahead and just check over here. When theirs is 1 million, it's also 8333, and when it's whatever that is, it's whatever that is. Okay, so it looks like it's working fine. Let's just go ahead and change 1 to purple and see that, yeah. Okay, so that's the solution video for this. I hope you guys found it useful, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.